encourage you to stay with KHON2, both on air and online, as we continue to follow this volcanic emergency, continuing coverage to bring you all the very latest. For now, we thank you for joining us. Howard Deshevsky in the newsroom. We'll see you at 5. Until then, we return you to our regularly scheduled programming. Good afternoon, everybody. Once again, Howard Deshevsky live in the KHON2 News Studio as we are awaiting once again to take you live to the Big Island, where we will be getting a daily update, a 3 p.m. update from Civil Defense Talmadge. Good afternoon, everybody. Once again, Howard Deshevsky live in the KHON2 News Studio as we are awaiting once again to take you live to the Big Island, where we will be getting a daily update, a 3 p.m. update from Civil Defense. Talmadge Magno, the Big Island Civil Defense Coordinator, as he's been doing daily, will come out and address the media and provide all the latest information. Of course, we say 3 o'clock, but Hawaii time. Yesterday, that update happened at about 3:15. This, what you're looking at on the right, this was a big explosion that took place, a big column of ash and smoke arising, overlooking the crater at the summit of Kilauea Volcano. HVO's interpretation of what happened here, what you're looking at, is that it was triggered by a rock fall from the steep walls of the overlooked crater. This photograph of these images taken early this morning at about 8:30 from the Jagger Museum. Now, that is the place where, if you've been to Hawaii Volcanoes National Park, that is the primary museum that overlooks the Halemaumau crater and looks right into the lava lake. The explosion, we're told, was pretty short-lived, but you can see pretty dramatic the result of that. One of the big concerns, remember just about 10 days ago, before this whole eruptive event that we're now covering, there was what they were calling an inflationary period that was happening not only down at Pu'uo'o Vent and in the East Rift Zone, but in Halemaumau crater itself. And that lava lake, the lava that normally kind of bubbles down about 100 feet or so below the surface of that pit inside the crater, well, it was bubbling up and over. And on the largest day, some 44 acres of lava covered or spilled out, covering the floor of Halemaumau. The fear now is that that lava lake is dropping so low that it could interact with the water table underneath the volcano. Now, if that were to happen, imagine if you put 1,200-degree lava and you dropped it into some water, what's going to happen? You're going to have a huge explosion of heat and ash when they come together simultaneously. And we're going to go to Justin Cruz in a short while just to kind of explain the science behind that. But if that were to happen, that could be something very dramatic and very potentially dangerous for anybody who's in the park. As scientists with the Hawaiian Volcano Observatory are saying that that could possibly shoot pebbles and ash hundreds of feet in the air and perhaps surround an area of up to a half-mile wide. We're not just talking little pebbles too, but huge chunks of rock and other things. Now, Marissa Yamane has been on the Big Island for the last couple of days. She actually had an opportunity to go up there to Hawaii Volcanoes National Park and brings us now an update of what's happening and what happened earlier at the Halemaumau crater.
Hi, Howard. Over my shoulder, you can see the white plume coming out of Halemaumau crater. White now, but take a look at this video that we shot from around 11 o'clock this morning. So what's happening in this video is lava lake is so low, rocks are breaking off, they're falling in, and when those rocks hit what's left of the lava, there are gas explosions. Poof! Up comes all that ash and dust. And while it is creating an amazing sight, scientists are monitoring the situation because it won't be too good if the lava lake drops too low.
And so one of the concerns is if the lava lake continues to drop and it drops below the water table, instead of these gas-driven explosions like we're seeing now, we could get into a situation where the water from the groundwater below the water table could mix in with the magma, and then we would have these steam-driven explosions. We refer to them as phreatic explosions, and they can be orders of magnitude larger. It was similar to what happened in 1924 when there were these large explosions, and those are more vigorous and there's more energy involved, and so larger fragments can be blown out and greater distances.
how far? I mean, would people here standing at Jagger Museum be in any danger?
Well, it depends on the vigor of the explosion and the wind direction. So yes, there could be, if the winds were right, we could have a dusting of ash here. If it's a really explosive, there could be pebbles falling here. But I can assure you that we're working closely with Hawaii Volcanoes National Park, and if that becomes a possibility, it's already a possibility. If it becomes closer to a possibility, the national park will take action to keep visitors safe.
And that could mean closing the park, or at least this area. The bottom line is safety. But nevertheless, take a look at this. This is drawing quite a crowd here, and definitely quite a treat for everyone visiting Jagger Museum and Halemaumau Crater. Back to you, Howard.
All right, Marissa, thank you very much. Yeah, people travel by the hundreds of thousands every year to come to the Big Island specifically to see the volcano. Many people are shut out. Well, the people that are near now, boy, they're getting a treat and then some. In fact, some people unable to see it because the park was closed last week, Friday and into Saturday, when the first breakouts happened because of fumes and potential dangers. But right now, the visitors have an opportunity to see what's going on inside the park. We do want to tell you that there has been a new fissure that has opened up. It is now fissure number 15, and a total of 1,600 people have been evacuated. We're told the press conference is getting underway, so let's head over to the Big Island and pick up Talmadge Magno with the latest update.
Okay, south of the rift zone.
This is Jim Kawahikawa.
Probably occurring within the rift zone.
So you said it might be on the rift zone if it looks like there's some.
Yes.
There's not enough seismometers or something.
Well, there is now, but there wasn't earlier, and I'm not sure how well they've assimilated the new data yet. So it's just safe to say that if there's a bunch of seismicity to the south of the rift zone, that it's likely going to be relocated farther inland.
No other homes destroyed today or buildings?
As far as we know, this just happened. Yeah.
36 structures.
Still that number?
Yes, it's still that. This just happened, so.
Yeah.
Okay.
Jim, can you speak about the activity up at Halemaumau? And there's been a lot of talk, obviously, today about the lava lake level dropping and what
Yes.
happens when it gets to the water table.
There was a question in there somewhere.
Explain a little bit about that process and what we've seen
Yes.
today and what you think that means at this point.
So with the beginning of this process, the lava lake started dropping. The whole summit area started subsiding, the Kilauea crater, which is two phenomena by the same cause. The magma reservoir was depressurizing. What we know from 1924, and of course we use past examples to indicate what's going to happen in the future, but in 1924, very similar things happened. The lava lake actually disappeared because it was a different configuration. We get to see it disappear for quite a bit longer. We can measure the rates, and if it keeps receding from the surface, at some point it's going to be down at or below the level of the water table at the summit. And in 1924, we hypothesized that was the mechanism, the start of the mechanism for explosive eruptions that followed in May of 1924, that the conduit was emptied, the lava kept receding below the water table. At some point, water started invading the column and was flashing into steam. And of course, you can imagine it's a very narrow conduit up to the surface. You have water flashing into steam, it's pretty explosive. And it blew out. The conduit, it ended up doubling the diameter of Halemaumau, and it was a pretty impressive set of 2.5 weeks of explosions in the 1924. So we have issued a notice that we see the same conditions starting to occur. Well, they are occurring, and if it follows the 1924 example, there's a possibility that steam blast explosions may occur in a few days.
Today's plume and ash expulsion a result of that, or just?
No, today's what was that about?
This morning,
yeah,
8:30 or
something like that. Yeah, 8:30. You're right. That explosion, we believe, was due to rock falls. The column is empty for at least 200 or 300 yards. And we've had a lot of rock falls that have come in. Rocks have fallen in the lake, a big expulsion of gas and stuff, so we get Pele's hair and blobs up to the surface. In this case, we think it was a little bit different, that they continue to be rock falls, but the conduit gets narrower with depth. And I think the last working hypothesis I saw was that the rocks have accumulated down in the bottom, sealing the conduit off, and the magma below was still exsolving gas, and eventually the pressure built up enough to blast the rocks out. Very similar to what happened in March of 2008. We got the first blast out, same thing, the conduit had been blocked by debris and pressure built up. So that's what we think happened.
How much of a threat does that pose to any communities nearby or anything?
Well, if you saw the video of the picture of the plume, it was quite dust laden, and it was moving with the trades to the southwest. So it's possible that communities to the southwest may have gotten a dusting of ash from that explosion this morning.
But if it gets worse, then what does that mean?
Well, if it gets worse, there'll be stronger explosions, and I think our release this morning explains the possible outcomes depending on the size of the ejecta. The larger pieces probably won't go as far as the smaller pieces, and I can't recite that list, but it's in our release this morning.
Are people in the volcano at risk at all if that happens?
Depends on the magnitude of the explosions. There's a community meeting tonight at 7 at the Kilauea Visitor Center inside the park, where Tina Neal and Don Swanson will be there to answer questions like that. And they're far more informed about it than I am. But it all depends on the energy of the explosions.
What are you looking out for now at the summit? I mean, what do you anticipate might happen?
What might happen? Well, I just explained what might happen.
I mean, are you expecting like some giant eruption? Or are you looking for a couple of little splats here and there?
Well, we don't really know, but we are sort of, our past examples have been small to moderate size explosions. And moderate meaning roughly like the 1924. In 1924, a lot of the Kilauea crater and structures on the rim got, say, pea-sized stuff deposited there. Bigger pieces went to shorter distances away.
Is there anything you can tell us about this 15th fissure that's opened up?
Well, it just opened up. It crossed Pohoiki Road between Leilani and Hinalo Street. And it was short-lived. It issued lava flow about 20 meters from the fissure, but that's about it.
So it's no longer actively sitting on lava?
It didn't damage?
It was degassing, it was putting on SO2 gas, but yeah.
So that would be the closest one so far to PGV, is that correct?
Yes, it was the closest. Let's see. It's a difficult one to answer. I'd have to see a map, but it's going sort of tangential to the PGV property. I guess it's closest to the boundary of the property. But,
boundary,
yeah.
If that one remained active, would it direct lava toward the plant?
I'd have to see a map. I couldn't tell you offhand.
So lava has crossed Pohoiki Road, not just a crack, but actual lava?
No, a crack crossed. The crack was erupting lava out of the crack. It was a fissure.
Yeah.
Fissure vent. The lava itself was flowing away from the fissure, but I don't know. We don't have enough photos yet to tell which way the lava went in this case.
About how wide was the fissure? Just ballpark? About how wide was the fissure?
Couldn't tell you. We have one good aerial view of it, and what most of the view is the side parts where the spatter has started to form a rampart, and so I can't really tell how wide the fissure itself was.
And the time on that one? The time that it opened, as far as you know?
I should have been paying attention.
About 2:30, yeah.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah,
3 o'clock.
Yeah.
And I don't know if this is something you can answer, but yeah, if as seems to be getting closer to Puna geothermal, what safety precautions are being taken along those lines?
Okay, I can speak to that. PGV briefed us this morning and said that they were moving of the 60,000 gallons of 67 plus gallons of pentane. They were moving it to shipment today. 15,000 gallons is moving over to shipment. And then in the next couple of days, the remaining 50 some odd thousand gallons are being moved to shipment, and it'll be totally removed.
In the next couple of days?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
But, I mean, if in fact something happens closer to it within those next couple of days, how much of it?
I don't want to speculate. I really don't. I haven't heard, but I know that that my boss, Talmadge Magno, is out at the scene to inspect and to strategize on contingency plans, okay, to mitigate whatever might happen. But we really are not speculating.
Because I thought they had said before that, was it a couple of days ago, that all that was going to be taken out, but...
Right. Yeah, I don't know the distance offhand. How far would you say this fissure, this number 15, is from...
Like how much at risk are we really with
the plant itself, the wellheads? Do you have a feel for that?
Quite a ways. I mean, the fissure did not go through the boundary.
Yeah.
It's still in Lanipuna Garden.
It's not in PGV's. And PGV is a big property. I don't know if you've been there, but it's a very big property. And you have to go through some way to get to it. It's not, it's not right on the side of the road. It's you have to go through a gate and a long drive, etc. But I can't tell you how far in, but it's far in.
So how worried are you about something pretty devastating like that occurring as we've seen all this?
I can say we are concerned. There's no question. We are concerned. And we have been concerned about this from the get-go. And we have been thinking about what we can do, etc. But I'm not sure exactly at this moment what the plan is, because as you see, this thing has changed. The scenarios have changed hour to hour sometimes. Yeah. So, but I can say that Civil Defense is actively working to strategize what to do next. Yeah. But I can't tell you what.
Pattern is the
Sorry, I'll look last one. Why has it taken so long to move the pentane off site? I mean, it's been going for weeks.
That's a question for PGV.
They shut the plant immediately.
They shut it immediately. We had heard initially that they were waiting for ISO containers, the kind of containers that you carry highly flammable materials like naphtha in. They were telling us that they were supposed to come in from either other islands or the mainland. So that's what we heard, but I don't know. I really can't answer that because that's a PGV question.
And the way the fissures have been opening up, are we looking at a pattern where it seems to be moving toward PGV? Or there is no way to say that?
Well, if you've been watching what happens, the fissure locations have been hopping back and forth. It'd be easy to answer your question if they were all kind of stepping in line in one direction, but they haven't been. Over the last 2 days, the fissures have been on the eastern end, but even they have not been progressively moving out. It's just the entire group. If you look at the entire group, they are expanding coverage, but very slowly. I mean, this one, 6 was the closest one to Pohoiki before this afternoon, and then now they've probably extended another, maybe, I'm guessing, 100, 150 meters to the east.
Jim, you've been watching this mountain and studying this mountain for years. The fissure activity, the public's been hypersensitive to the number of fissures and the location. Yes. Is the pattern of all these small fissures opening up similar to what you've seen in other places on Kilauea historically, just not in a subdivision, obviously?
It's very similar to the 1955 eruption down in Puna. And in fact, this set of fissures is right within a gap of the 55 fissures, which is kind of interesting to us, but we don't know what it means yet. But yes, during the 1955 eruption, fissures sort of hopped around, but they generally stayed to one side of Pu'uhonu'ula for the first bit, and then after a pause, they moved over to the west side of Pu'uhonu'ula and went out west of Highway 130. It was similar in the sort of hopping around business. The lavas were less viscous, and so they would erupt, forming flows. In that eruption, there were a couple of flows that actually one on the Kamoho side almost went to the ocean, on the west side from Highway 130. They went to the ocean in 2 different places. So it was slightly different lava than what's currently coming out. This is pretty viscous stuff. It's not going very far. So we're just waiting to see what happens next.
Jim, you guys have been taking samples of the lava. What has that told you?
It's told us that the lavas are quite old. We don't see pool lavas in there yet. And if we had to guess, it might be as if we got a bunch of 1955 lava and stored it in a container somewhere and let it kind of react and percolate and whatever it does, and then took the sample again. It's changed in a way that is consistent with that anyway. And so we will be able to tell when pool or fresher lavas come into the system, but they will also probably be expressed in more fluid lavas being erupted.
So I'm sorry, because it's old lava, what does that mean exactly?
What does old lava mean?
Yeah, what is that? What is that telling you that old lava is coming?
Sorry, I didn't explain that part. What it tells us is that this intrusion got pushed under the community of the Leilani Estates and the entire rift zone, and so as it's come up, it's actually tapped other stored magmas under the ground, and so as it's come up, it's pushed out these older stored lavas. And so what we're seeing is stuff that's been sitting there for 60 years or so, which means that the fresher stuff is behind. It hasn't quite made the surface yet. We don't know whether it will, but we have the tools to see whether it does as the eruption progresses.
What does, to the naked eye, does old lava look any different from newer, younger lava?
I'm sorry, you have to say that again.
Does old lava to the naked eye, to our eyes, look any different than newer, younger lava?
Well, they'd be more viscous. If you saw this, viscous, meaning it's stickier. Like that lava flow from Fissure 8 was quite thick. It was It was sort of turning away as it went. It wasn't very fast. It wasn't Pohoihoi. And so this Fissure 15 actually put out a lava that almost had Pohoihoi characteristics, but it seemed to be pretty grainy. It's still kind of viscous. Pasty, sorry.
As far as civil defense, with what's happening with the crater, with possible explosions there, I mean, is there any safety precautions being taken for that possibility?
Well, tonight's meeting is going to tell us a lot about what sort of precautions are being contemplated. One of the things, my understanding from what Dr. Jim has been saying is that within a safe distance, I mean, if there were explosions, it's basically within about a mile radius, within a mile radius. So,
based on the 1924.
Right. So if you figure that, you're within the park. Okay, so the residents, the park would be evacuated, right? Obviously. My understanding is that ash and things like that are going to be, for the rest of us, small particulate matter. I read from the reports.
That's outside the mile radius.
That's outside of the mile radius, so that flies. And I heard that it could go as far possibly as North Hilo, but that's ash. That's, your car's going to get dusty, for example.
Not a threat, dangerous.
Not rocks or anything like that. They just don't go that far, thank goodness.
What about a respiratory issue if that kind of?
Well, you would think. The VOG affects people, so conceivably ash would affect people's breathing. So we would issue warnings about that if it warranted it. Yes, we would. We would.
The meeting tonight is where exactly?
The meeting tonight is at the Kilauea Visitor Center within the Hawaii Volcanoes National Park. So you go into the national park. It's at 7 o'clock, and my understanding is there are 2 prominent people from USGS HVO who are going to be there to explain what's happening. So,
is there still ash being expelled at Halemau as far as you know?
Is ash being expelled?
Still, there was obviously there was a big plume this morning, but anything
at least the last time I looked, no. It was basically gas and steam coming out.
Jen, is there a threat from to the well heads, the well caps? Is that one of the concerns that briefly this morning?
Well,
geothermal.
that's a PGV question, and it's way beyond my technical expertise.
Fall dam.
You know, if any sort
and
of,
you get an explosion.
I really don't know exactly what the line is on the wellheads, because I really don't know.
How much you say
material that's exploded out is probably
right now?
mainly the material
exactly
that,
where he is right
cascaded
now.
into the conduit from the conduit
I would
wall.
imagine he's going out
It can be thrown
Fisher 15, but he didn't say when he left. But he left shortly before this time.
Finer
you said he
particles of it. And these explosions, judging from the 1924 series of events, the explosions can last a minute or two or three, something like that, and then they die out quickly. Now, what was observed a couple of times in 1924 is what you would sort of intuitively expect.
In 12 kilometers east of
that
the
is
Lulani
that
Estates, Hawaii,
you're
with
observing
magnitude
the steam
2.7
plume
status A and a depth
that
of
is
1
rising
kilometer, occurred on an hour
passively
source
up
USGS.
the conduit, and then it suddenly shuts off. So you don't see any more steam. That might be an indicator that there's been a rock fall that is trapping the steam below it. And so in an ideal situation, you may be able to anticipate an explosion if you see a sudden drop-off in the amount of steam coming out of the volcano. Now, that was not observed very often in 1924, and I think it's a problem of reporting, and also people sort of lose interest in just steam coming out of the volcano. But in any case, that has been seen. And so these explosions then last for just a short time. And then the conduit becomes clear. Water is still pouring in, forming steam, and we resume the steam emission phase just as we had up here. In 1924, there were 2.5 weeks of such events. I think more than 60 of the events, some of them kind of hard to define. They would take place usually several hours apart, though there were exceptions. And if I had to guess, that is what I would guess is going to happen next at Kilauea if the magma drops down to below the water table. Now, these explosions produce deposits of ejected material on the ground surface. And the next three slides, the final ones that I'm going to be showing, illustrate the distribution of material deposited from the explosions, starting with the coarsest material and ending up with the finest material. It is the finest material, the ash, which will almost certainly be of most concern to you, but I want to go through the two larger stages as well. So the first stage is one that produces ballistic ejecta. Ballistics are rocks that are ejected like cannonballs or like a baseball off a bat, and they fell around Halemaumau. Now, this is a complicated slide, and I'm not going to get into detail, but this is the rim of the Halemaumau before the explosions occurred. The crater widened, so this is the current width now, and all the dots are ballistic blocks, the sizes of which I have measured, and they get up to the size of about 10 tons or so, maybe 2 yards in diameter. But they're confined, as you can see, to near Halemaumau. This is the scale down here, so the length of the bar is only 0.6 of a mile. So these ballistics were not thrown out more than half a mile or a little bit more than that. So it's unlikely that they would impact the caldera rim at all. The next size of ejecta, however, could. This involves material that would be softball size and smaller. The lines show the extent of rocks of a given diameter. For example, this line here shows the farthest out that rocks that were 4/10 of an inch in diameter extended. In the middle here, excluding the ballistic blocks, they get up to several inches or so. Of interest to you, even though most of these were confined to within the caldera, is that up here at the volcano house, the old location of the volcano house, pebbles the size of about 1/10 of an inch fell. These would sting, certainly, and they would scare you. They probably wouldn't be lethal, but you know, you wouldn't want to experience that kind of a fall. But now we get into the more important material that is ejected from the standpoint of hazards to you, and that would be the fine ash. I don't have a map showing the absolute distribution of the fine ash because it was never prepared in 1924, and rainwater quickly removed it. But from comments that were made at the time, we know that ash fell in North Hilo up at Hakalau, all the way down into Lower Puna. It made the railroad tracks in Maku'u so slippery once that the engine couldn't pull the train and had to stop. Ash coated all this area here, down to Pahala and as far as Waiohinu. The ash covered that much of the area, despite the fact that the winds were trade winds most of the time. And so that's surprising, and what that is suggesting is that some of the columns of ash reached up into the jet stream, which could blow the material in a counter trade wind direction. So that would mean column heights of at least 20,000 feet, or maybe a little bit more than that or so. So that's the kind of material that you can expect to be exploded out of the volcano if we get into one of these phases. And I'd like to turn it back to Tina now, who can talk to you about how to find out more about the hazards produced by the ash.
Thanks, Don. So again, we think it's most important to focus on the potential impacts of volcanic ash fall. And to help you with that, there is a great resource on the web, and I'm working with several agencies to try to get some reprints of the booklets and posters that go with the information on the web. The URL is up there at the top, and you don't have to write it down because there's some handouts in the lobby that have this website on it. But if you can go there, you'll find information that describes what volcanic ash is, its impacts on a variety of elements of our lives, everything from health to power, transportation, water supply, equipment and communications, with very specific information about the impacts and what you can do to mitigate those impacts. So I encourage you to take a look at it, and there are some really well-done booklets and pamphlets that can be downloaded, and we will try to make some hard copies of those available as soon as we can. I think the main thing to know again about ash is what I said at the beginning, is that it is not in itself a life-threatening phenomenon. It's an irritant, it's a nuisance, especially if it goes on for many weeks.
125 kilometers northeast of Whitianga with magnitude
there is information here about what to do with regard to protecting your property and your pets, and including your health. Guidance on what type of masks might be the most useful if you have to be outside in an ash fall. Generally speaking, it's prudent to avoid exposure during an ash fall if you can, but again, it's not life-threatening to be in a fine ash fall. I've been in many of them in Alaska, and what I recall being the most difficult part is keeping it out of your eyes. So wearing goggles if you have to be out, being particularly careful if you wear contacts, because if the ash gets behind the contacts, it can actually scratch your eye. Those kinds of tips and hints are all available on these websites. I think at that point we should stop, and because I'm sure you have a lot of questions, and we'll bring Kyle and Don back up here to answer your questions. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Wasn't there a lake deflation in about 2011, and it just didn't go down as far? Is that what the situation was?
Yeah, so the question is, wasn't there a deflation of the lake in 2011, and did it not just go down as far at that time? And yes, that's right. So there was an eruption, we call it the Komomo eruption at that time. So there was an intrusion of magma in the rift zone, and that caused the deflation of the summit, and the lava lake dropped substantially at that time. It did not drop as far as what we've seen now, and what's, I think, maybe more important is that the rate of the lava drop during that event was initially rapid, but it gradually, in fact, just over the span of a few days, it slowed gradually. We're not seeing that this time. What we're seeing is that the rate is really very constant. So this is quite different than what we saw during Komomo in 2011.
Yes, thank you for your presentation. One question I'm sure that a lot of people are probably thinking about is, I know that we've all heard in the past of cases of much more dramatic eruptions that would cause more widespread destruction. So are you saying that this episode is a different category of thing, or is that entirely ruled out?
Yeah, we are saying that this is, the question is that there have been larger explosions in the past. In fact, I've talked about them many times here. Why are we not discussing them now? Is what's going on now different? And the answer is yes, at this stage at least, what is happening is different. We are seeing a very localized
Fiji Islands with magnitude 5.32 status C and a depth of 598 kilometers occurred on in an hour. Source GEMPA.
Very large explosions take place. They will have to pass through this stage of smaller explosions due to the withdrawal of the magma. And so there's just nothing to suggest that we're jumping ahead into a large event. Let me give you an example. Currently, the caldera floor of Kilauea has dropped because of the deflation a few tens of centimeters or so, a foot, let's say, on that range. In 1924, the caldera floor dropped more than 13 feet. And even that did not trigger.
Earthquake occurred in 5 kilometers southwest of Teikaha with magnitude 2.5 status A and a depth of 6 kilometers occurred on in an hour. Source GeoNet.
Explosions and see how things develop before we start to be thinking more about the big powerful explosions, which could be much more hazardous.
Over here.
What is the composition of the ballistic material?
The question is, what is the composition of the ballistic material? I assume you mean the chemical composition?
Well, you know,
the
a baseball-sized piece of basalt would have a dramatically different effect than a baseball-sized piece of pumice.
The question is whether where the ballistic blocks are really heavy and not pumice, and yes, they are heavy. In fact, they represent wall rock from the conduit that has fallen in and then is blasted out. And many of them are actually denser than a piece of pahoehoe, say, that you go out now and collect, because the vesicles, the bubbles in these wall rocks have been filled in, and other changes have taken place. So these rocks can be very, very heavy. And so when I say that blocks can weigh 10 or 12 tons and be ejected half a mile or so. These are not so big, but they're just heavy because they're very dense.
If I could just add, in contrast to that, after this morning's event, which maybe some of you saw just around, I think it was 8:30 or so, Don went down to the crater rim to see what had been thrown out of the conduit this morning, and instead of the heavy, dense basalt that he was just describing, what he found was a lighter weight, more pumiceous rock that was bits of the lava lake that had been exploded up from depth. So we went down this morning, or he went down this morning to test whether we were actually bringing up dense lithic blocks. Yes, in the back.
Yes, the day of and subsequent to the 6.9, down at Volcano Village and where we live at the end of Jade, there were a number of magnitude 3 to 3.5, very shallow depth. Can you offer your thoughts on the mechanics of those quakes?
The question regards the number of very shallow and felt earthquakes around the time of the magnitude 6.9 on the south flank of Kilauea. Those were indeed rather unusual in an area that we do not normally see earthquakes. And I'd have to say that I don't think there's consensus yet on what they really mean. However, a 6.9 earthquake is certainly large enough that there will be aftershocks throughout the region that slipped during the earthquake, and that is one reason in the subsequent days there were many events scattered throughout the south flank of Kilauea, and we can expect aftershocks to continue for weeks to months more. Do either of you want to say more about that scattering of earthquakes? Okay. Sorry to put you on the spot. Tom.
Just to follow up on Don's comment, Don, could you elaborate why you think Kilauea will pass through a series of small explosive eruptions before it gets to one of these periods of 1790 type explosive eruptions that involve much more destructive capabilities?
The question is why I think that we'll have to pass through a Halemaumau draining kind of series of events before we get into a big one. I think small ones presage big ones. And there's a lot of evidence that the lava lake is draining, that it's approaching the water table, and we can make reasonable hypotheses that will generate explosions. There is no evidence now whatsoever that we're in a situation where we're going to have wholesale caldera collapse, or even the collapse of, say, the Halemaumau magma reservoir, independent of the lava lake. So I think we have to wait for evidence before we start worrying about the biggest, most hazardous events. I'm not saying that they're not going to happen, but they're not certainly in the foreseeable future, and we see no evidence for them.
Do we have any kind of, will we have any kind of notice between the time that enough rocks fall to block the steam plume to the time that causes an explosive eruption?
The question was whether we'll have some time or warning of a steam explosion that produces the deposits that Don described. The answer is probably not. These phreatic, or is another word for steam-driven explosions, tend to happen suddenly. As Don described, there may be this process of a visible steam plume that disappears during the time of pressure capping and pressurization, but at night or during bad weather, Halemaumau is only a mile outside my office, and there are many days I can't see it. That visual clue may not be there. So we do not think that we will at this time see recognizable geophysical precursors to such a thing. That could change. One of our jobs is to look for patterns that we can recognize repeatedly, and if we are witness to some of these events, we might develop some insight. But even then, we think the warning would be so short, it would really not be of much use. Yes, ma'am.
So are these explosions predicted or potentially could cause large tsunami events, and would camping on a beach over the next few weeks be a bad idea?
You have a field camp coming up. The question was whether this activity could at all produce tsunamis or be associated with tsunami. The answer is no. The impulsive, explosive events we're talking about are up here at Haleʻiʻamaomao. They shouldn't have any effect on the coast. With that said, we are still in a period of significant potential aftershocks. So there is the possibility of certainly a large felt earthquake. Yeah. Yes, ma'am. In 1924, this explosive activity that we described went on, I think, for 2 weeks, two and a half weeks. But frankly, there's no reason to believe or assert that it will be an exact replay of that duration in 1924. But I think the bottom line is once this process starts, we should be thinking that we might have to deal with it for weeks.
Is the ash hot?
Is the ash hot? Don, you want to hit that one?
The question is the ash hot? And it would be hot or very warm immediately upon eruption, but it cools quickly when it gets in the air. And so it will be cool when it lands. And in fact, much of the ash will probably be wet when it lands. Because the steam that is driving the explosions, the steam will get in the air, cool, and condense. And so the ash that rains out will be wet. And that presents a problem, actually, at times, because wet ash will cake onto things, whereas dry ash would just fall particle by particle and slough off. So, but anyway, to answer your question, the ash will not be hot when it lands.
I should also point out that ash that is wet is much heavier than dry ash. And one of the concerns if the ash accumulation gets to a certain point is the weight issue. There were stories of the 1924 ash, I think, damaging gutters in Glenwood because of it washed into the gutters and was too heavy. So at certain accumulations, the weight, especially of wet ash, becomes an issue. Yes, sir.
Earthquake occurred in south of Fiji Islands with magnitude 5.5 status A and a depth of 594 kilometers occurred on in 39 minutes, source EMSC.
So the question was about the volume of material that's leaving the lava lake now and comparing that to the volume that's coming out in Puna right now. That's actually a great question. The volume that's coming down out of the lava lake, we have a reasonably good constraint on. We know something about the geometry, especially now that the lake is drained. We can go out and actually measure how big the conduit is. Those measurements are still underway. I think we have a ballpark estimate. It's probably on the order of a few million cubic meters. Those are just some back-of-the-envelope calculations I did earlier. As for Lower Puna, I'll ask Tina about this, but I believe that we actually have not a fantastic constraint on what's coming out. The volume has not been huge. There have been a lot of small fissures, not a lot in the way of
earthquake
large lava
occurred
flows.
in 9 kilometers south norte de Napuca, El Salvador with magnitude 3 status A and a depth of 2 kilometers occurred on in an hour, source INETR.
No, I don't have an exact number yet, but it's certainly not any more than a couple million cubic meters. In fact, I think it's much less than that. The fissure vents and the lava flows have been really small volume. So there's not necessarily one-to-one correspondence between the volume we've lost here and what's come out down in the fissure vents. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Would there be sulfuric acid mixed with the wet ash?
Yeah.
And also if you could comment on the acid rain that has been in the news.
Sure. Comment on acid rain and sulfuric acid, the sulfur dioxide gas that might be part of these explosions. We would expect each of these explosions to produce a burp of sulfur dioxide gas as well. When that mixes with the water in the atmosphere, it can produce acid rain. But I'll remind the volcano community, you've been dealing with that for 10 years now, so you have practice. And I don't think we would expect the conditions with regard to acid rain to be any worse in this type of activity than you have experienced already. In the same vein, the kind of particulate infiltration into your water systems you've also been dealing with, to some degree, with the Pele's hair and other fine, in cases, fine pieces of volcanic glass that have been lofted into the atmosphere during the lava lake period. Yes, ma'am.
For those of us who have livestock, is it something that we should start thinking about moving them out, or just covering them within our own property should be sufficient based on the amount of ash that we should expect?
The question was about if you own livestock and if you should be thinking of moving them out or just protecting them. My guidance, and I would encourage you to look at this website for further information.
Earthquake occurred in 203 kilometers SSW of NDOI Island, Fiji, with magnitude 5 status A and a depth of 603 kilometers occurred on in 36 minutes. Source USGS.
This kind of volcanic ash, if it falls on the feed area for livestock, may not be good for them to eat. Yeah. Yes, ma'am. Oh. Anne-Marie. Don, you answered that question at 4. I'm going to let you go there again.
The question was what kind or how much daily accumulation of ash can you expect? It's hard to say, but I would say a small fraction of an inch normally out where you live, and probably mainly when Kona winds are blowing. The ash will fall out of the air after each eruption over a course of a few tens of minutes or so. So the air will probably clear between explosions unless the explosions are very close together. I wish we had more information about the ash, though, but as I said, in 1924, they really didn't pay much attention to the ash. They had a lot of other things to do. And as a result, I can't be really specific about what you might expect in volcano, but I think it would be a small fraction of an inch.
Okay, in the back.
One of the volcano websites on Facebook recommends we start bringing our pets in as of Friday. Can you comment on that, please?
Well, the question was about whether we should start bringing our pets in as of Friday. You may recall Kyle, in his presentation, pointed out that intersection of the projected line of descent of the lava column and time looks to be Friday. But that's no absolute guarantee that an ash-producing event or events will begin to happen on Friday. I think it's best to wait to see what happens and bring your pets in accordingly. If we have strong trade winds, volcano should be largely protected from volcanic ash fall unless it goes extremely high and we get wind reversal, as Don described. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I have a question, and maybe it's just that I don't completely understand, but when you're saying the word explosions, and I understand we're kind of in store for aftershocks and things, but do explosions generate kinds of quakes, earthquakes again, in bigger numbers?
The kinds of explosive process we're talking about here would not be something that would create an earthquake similar to the ones you've been feeling in the past few days. However, there can be, in fact, just this morning, an opposite relationship in that there was a magnitude 2.8 earthquake just almost instantaneously
Earthquake
with
occurred in
the explosion that
285
happened
kilometers
at
north
8:30,
of
and it probably
Tearo, with
prompted
magnitude 4.4 status A and a depth of 470 kilometers
Yes, sir.
occurred on in 35 minutes. Source GeoNet.
Coming out of this, let alone ash fall, which is just kind of an inconvenience. Are there dangerous gases that can come out and actually impact people?
Right. The question was again about gases that could be released during these kinds of explosions. There will be likely a sudden burst of an extra amount of sulfur dioxide, or potentially, but again, we don't think this would be any more than this area has already been subject to in the open lava lake period of the last 10 years.
So nothing.
There's no other gas phase that we're worried about right now.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Is there anything going on in Mauna Loa?
Is there anything? Is there anything going on in Mauna Loa? The short answer is no, nothing that we're worried about. When things started to ramp up, it seems like last year, but it was just a few days ago, I think. We had a staff meeting, and collectively we committed to not forgetting about Mauna Loa. So we are watching the data coming in from Mauna Loa still, and I'll put Asta on the spot on the side because she's one of the experts on watching Mauna Loa, and you will confirm that the volcano is at this point quiet, right, Mom? Right, Asta? So we're still watching Mauna Loa, yes. Yes, sir.
So one of the things that I'm getting hanged about on Facebook here is, do you expect there to be any sort of evacuations from this event? There's a lot of concern based on how the evacuation of Lake Bonny went, that people may not be prepared and things may not go well.
We are in contact with Civil Defense, who of course is the question was about evacuations. Are we aware of any evacuation planning, or will evacuations occur? We've been talking to Civil Defense about the unfolding situation here at the summit. They obviously have their hands full with what's going on in Lower Puna. But at the time that becomes even an issue, it would be their call. But the kinds of events that we're describing tonight, what Don walked you through, in my estimation, would not require any kind of evacuation from the volcano village. I think it's prudent, however, to say, as we did in our public statement this morning, that went out about 30 minutes before the big explosion, that all of the residents in the Kilauea Summit area think about your homes and businesses' exposure to volcanic ashfall. What vulnerabilities can you address now in terms of covering things, protecting things, having extra air filters on hand, kinds of things recommended at this website, and also thinking broadly about your home emergency plan. And that's good for an increasingly severe volcanic event, if we should get there, but also for a bad earthquake or other emergency. So it's always a good idea for everyone to review your own emergency planning. Yes, sir, in the back.
What's the likelihood of the lava lake arresting quickly on the descent if it hits the lip of whatever it's feeding? Is there a possibility that will move?
Kyle.
Yeah. So the question is there a possibility that the lava lake will stop dropping when it reaches that liquid interface? Is there some interaction there? No, we don't believe so. As far as we know, the magma surface is really relatively indifferent as it drops in the conduit to the magma surface. So as far as we know, unfortunately not.
What about the conduit that it's flowing into? If it reaches that conduit level, can it arrest?
So the question was, what if it reaches the conduit that feeds out to the eruption site? Is that correct? Yeah, will it arrest at that point? And again, no. So as we understand it, magma rises up beneath the summit of Kilauea. That's the supply. It goes through the summit reservoir system, and then it drains out to the rift zone towards the eruption site. At this point, that lava lake is really nowhere, the lava lake surface is nowhere near getting down to the point where that conduit reaches out to the rift zone. Below the lava lake is the reservoir itself. And the shallow reservoir is probably over 1 kilometer deep at Kilauea. So there's no expectation that at any point the eruption will stop feeding magma to the rift zone. As far as we know, and this is difficult to constrain right now because the summit is deflating so rapidly, but magma is still supplying the eruption of Kilauea. It's just coming in much more slowly than it's going out. Up in front?
Yeah, I understand there's lava tubes that run through up here, and what's the likelihood of a fissure opening up here? Or fissure, how's it pronounced, by the way?
The question is that there's a big lava tube up here, and is there any possibility that a fissure would form along the lava tube? Was that the question? I think the lava tube that you're talking about is the one that starts at Thurston Lava Tube and goes all the way down into Paradise Park. That is a lava tube that formed in the 1400s during the eruption of a big eruption in that area. It doesn't have any relationship to any fissure at all, and so I think it would be simply happenstance and very unlikely at that a fissure would follow along that trend.
After the 2.5 weeks of ash explosions, then what happened?
After the 1924 explosion ended, then what happened? Kilauea kind of went into the doldrums, in a sense. The explosions ended in late May. A little puddle of lava reappeared in July, I think it was. And then after that, there were 6 or 7 other episodes of activity in Halemaumau spread over the next decade or more. So it was really a terrific downturn in activity from what had been going on at Halemaumau before that time, which was essentially continuous activity. We don't really understand why that happened. We think that the draining process of Halemaumau in 1924 was a comparatively shallow feature, the upper kilometer or 2, whereas the summit magma reservoir should have been replenished from a depth of 100 kilometers, 60 miles, and either that replenishment system turned off or greatly dropped down, or the magma was going somewhere else in the volcano, and we don't have an answer to that question. So I would have, because we don't understand that, I would have no idea as to what might happen currently if we do get into an explosive period and it then ends. I wouldn't know what to expect.
It might also be worth pointing out that the conditions elsewhere on the volcano are quite different now from in 1924. We're just seeing potentially the end of 35 years of activity at Pu'u'o on the Middle East Rift and the beginning of
51 kilometers occurred on in an hour. Source GEMPA.
Is Pu'u'o Pau? Well, time will tell. It certainly collapsed in a very large way on April 30th. And as of the last time we were in the vicinity, there is no active lava visible down in the bottom of that very deep collapsed crater. The 61G flow that was being fed from the Pu'u'o is most certainly Pau. Time will tell if lava returns there. We do know that there's material transporting in the rift zone past Pu'u'o and down to the Lower East Rift Zone, so that may be the new preferred outlet. Yes. Yes, in the back.
Thank you guys for coming and devoting so much.
Earthquake occurred in NW Chia H with magnitude 2.7 status A and a depth of 11 kilometers occurred on in 28 minutes. Source IGN.
As historical scientists, you guys working with analogies, and Dr. Swanson mentioned the analogy between the 24 situation and the current one. Is there any analogy to be made between the Aila'au sequence of flows in the 14th century that preceded the 1790 event and the last 30 years of Kilauea flows that we're at now?
I think that's a Don Swanson question.
The question is really a good one. The question is whether there is an analogy between the Aila'au eruption, which was the largest lava flow producing eruption at Kilauea since people have been on the island, took place during the 14th century, during the 1400s, and immediately preceded the caldera collapse. Is there any analogy between that eruption and the long-lasting Pu'u'o eruption? In other words, the implication could be that the Pu'u'o eruption is almost as big as Aila'au. Maybe its ending will foresee the collapse of the caldera once again. That's a question that I've asked myself many times, and I think we should point it out to people, and because this makes us aware of the possibility that a caldera collapse is in the future. But there is one big difference, and I think that might be critical. And that big difference is that Pu'u'o is located way down the East Rift Zone. And the magma conduit pathway to it is very different from the magma conduit to the Aila'au eruption, which was centered above Thurston Lava Tube. And I I rather suspect that somehow that is an important element that would argue against the Pu'u'o'o eruption being a forerunner for a caldera collapse, but I'm uncertain about that, and I have, as I said, thought about this many times.
Putting the back here.